Okay, I'm genuinely starstruck to be sitting here with one of my favorite singers. She's an amazing singer. She creates incredible educational content on social media. She's got something called The Breakdown on Reels, which I love, and we'll talk more about. And she's got her own podcast. I'm all over the place. So thank you for being here, Dara Starr Tucker.
Thank you for having me, Ben. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while too. I as soon as I found out who you were and found your Instagram account, I loved everything that you were up to. I just felt like I kept learning more about you and appreciating more and more. So this is like, I've been looking forward to this for months.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I know we've been trying to get schedules arranged for a while, so I'm glad we were finally able to work it out.
Yeah. Tale as old as Zoom.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I want to talk about first and foremost, I think what's so special about your work that I want to just bring into the beginning of this conversation is the incredible range that you have with your public presence. And what I mean by that is, of course, you have a wonderful vocal range, but specifically, I mean your work as a musician, the content that you create, and the way that your content stretches into really, really relevant cultural commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like a legendary combination right there. You know, that feels like just like such a beautiful whole package. Could you speak to that? Do you feel like those are connected for you in your life?
Well, ultimately, yes, but I don't feel like I've necessarily done the best job of connecting them for other people. And that's part of the mission that I'm on right now. I do have an album that's coming out in June. And so part of the focus of that is just like, I'm calling the album Dara Starr Tucker because those identities of Dara Tucker, the singer, and Dara Starr Tucker, the online personality, the social media commentator or whatever, those two entities have been quite separate for most people. So learning how to integrate those things is priority number one at this point for me. But yes, I do feel that the work that I do as a social commentator, I guess, online, and the work I do as a singer, I do feel like those two things are inextricably tied. I remember when I first kind of started getting into that social media space a couple of years ago. I guess it's coming up on 3 years ago now, during the pandemic, really. Slightly before the pandemic, really. But I remember saying to my husband, his name is Greg Bryant, he's my bass player and manager as well. But I remember saying to Greg, I just kind of stopped and I said, I really feel like there's an audience out there for me that I am supposed to connect with, but I just have not identified the platform or the that way in which that connection needs to happen. I feel like I'm putting my music out there. It's being heard to a degree, but I don't really feel like the message is reaching people. I don't really feel like it is. I feel like I'm shouting into the abyss a little bit. And I was like, there's an audience there for me. And I feel like I remember feeling like singing was limiting for me. It was not allowing me to express the full breadth of who I am and what I have to say and, what it is I'm was meant to do. And so it was a very intentional pivot that happened a few years ago where I went, okay, I've got to sort of release these bounds and these expectations for how this connection and communication with my people is supposed to happen. I'm like, I remember telling him that very vividly. I was like, my people are out there, the people that I'm meant to connect with. I mean, not in the sense of my fans, but the people like you that I'm supposed to make connections with, they're there, but there's some sort of barrier that's getting in the way. I need to figure out how to push through that barrier. So that's been a whole process for me, in stripping away some of these, these internal barriers that I had set up about, that had been taught to me from a very early age, that you don't talk about this and you don't address that. And we make things very nice and palatable for people. And we don't just hit things head on, and we don't lean into these issues around race and, culture. We don't do this. I was not taught to be that sort of person. So it's been quite the, as they say, the journey. It's been quite the journey to kind of, learn how to connect these two parts of myself. But that's the focus. That's the goal going forward. It's like, all right, now how do we make all of this sort of live together in harmony and organically, the music along with the social media, commentator world. How do we make those things exist in a unified way?
I mean, I think you're doing a great job with it. And for me as a fan and as a spiritual person, or someone who cares about spirituality and wants to be a spiritual person, who wants to do things right, and become a better person, I see your work as, the breakdown, for example, where you have a reel where you express a really clear concept from your own unique perspective. You have really good visuals and really good talking points that you work through to get through an idea. I love them and I appreciate them so much. And I'm like, can some major production company please give her a shitload of money to keep producing these? Any day now, someone please, someone who has shitloads of money, this is a great place to put it. So any listeners, but anyway, what I see is I saw, I'll just say one that's an example right now. I'll just use a couple. I'll say one of your songs and one of your breakdowns. One of them was, one of the reels was about why we shouldn't edit out blackface scenes in old movies. And of course that was a surprising thing to hear, because it's that they're offensive, they make people uncomfortable, they shouldn't be there. And it's but your take on it was, yeah, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. But the point is that idealized version of America that so many Americans think about actually had this really, really terrible racist undertone that we forget about, that we edit out.
Right.
And so that was a really, really important topic. You addressed it in a really interesting way. You showed those scenes that I had never seen in movies that I watched growing up, much like you were describing. And so that's one of the reels. And so I'm watching you describe this surprising perspective, but then also explain why, which makes perfect sense. And then I'm listening to your song. I think Giants, is that the name of a song?
Yeah.
Giants. I know the song. I could sing it badly, but I know the song. And so Giants, I see that song as about, I will walk this road alone. And it sort of feels, it's got that reference to David and Goliath, where David's got his stone, he's facing this huge Goliath. And turns out the stone, that one little single stone is still enough. And so I'm seeing this very spiritual theme, that from a spiritual perspective, I see it already in your music and in your larger work in the world, which I think is much bigger than social media. But your work on the global stage, when it comes to your perspectives and your ability to communicate and educate on those topics, I see them already deeply connected. But you're saying that you're actually presenting them as connected with this new album?
I don't know that even thematically that the album necessarily, we had considered that approach, kind of doubling down on the last project that I did, which was called Dreams of Waking. And that project was conceived during the kind of uprising in late 2020 around the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor slayings. And it was very much social justice oriented, the last album that I did. Mm-hmm. And we were doing some Stevie Wonder stuff. You Haven't Done Nothing. We did Bridge Over Troubled Water. We did, some kind of protesty songs from the 60s and 70s. Right. But that's not really the way that I write. And I wanted to focus on my own writing on this upcoming album. And so we had thought, as I said, of kind of doubling down on that message and just like, all right, this is a continuation of Dreams of Waking, and this is going to live with this, and we're going to tell this story. And when when we got into the process of planning the next project, it just didn't feel like the direction to go in. It was like, no, let's just dig deep into this personal space that I write from, and just, let me express more of my heart. As you said, that giant song, it isn't necessarily, let's go out and fix the world and heal the world. Right. But let's do the internal work that it takes to be better human beings in the world. And that's always the space that I've just naturally written from. I have a couple of songs that I would think of as being like outward facing, that feel more like the work that I do with social media. But most of my work is very contemplative and very personal, with, as you said, kind of a spiritual element. And, referencing that one, very overtly references a biblical story, which is my history. That's how I grew up. I'm the child of a minister. And so all of those things, inform who I am, where the place that I write from, my upbringing. And so I never want to get into a space of putting on or feeling that it's my job to sort of play into a narrative around my creative work. I just want to do my best to allow the work to speak for itself, and to allow people to truly hear my heart. And so this is really just I don't know that there's some grand story for this album, which is frustrating the label. Like, what's the story here? I'm like, the story is, people online don't know that I do this. They don't know that this is a part of who I am. But I feel like a lot of folks who have connected with my content will feel, as you seem to have, will feel that natural connection and that outflow between the two things. I think it does make sense when you actually hear the music. It's like, oh, okay, this feels like her. This feels like what she does. But it's never an overt attempt to be that social justice warrior person through music. Though I do admire, I admire people who can capture that, in song. I just have never really been that. When I've written a couple of songs, there's a song called Song of Freedom that I wrote for an album that I did with Charlie Hunter. And that was someone actually requested, like, hey, can you write a song? We're going to do a march for racial equality and whatever. And can you write a song for this? And I did, because it was requested. It just would not really have been the type of thing I would have leaned into, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see a deeply contemplative practice as part of significant and meaningful work as an activist. It's like we can easily jump in and have a sign at a demonstration that someone organized, and that's good. And also there's a very deep inner process, even around any of the social justice issues, where we have to like deeply examine our own relationship to the issues. And and so I guess that's the thing that resonates automatically for me with your work is that I'm also a contemplative inner person. And I also see the world as like being in need of outward work. And so I think that that's a really, really cool thing. And that, to me, that almost is the story of an album I've never heard, that I don't know anything about. It's like, you have to, Marianne Williamson, says you have to do the inner work if you're going to be an effective activist. Gandhi said nonviolent activism is the way, you know, for great change to take place, but self-purification is necessary first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel, and it's also kind of an extension of the fact that I really, you know, think of myself as a just a multifaceted human being. And I think we all are. And that's the frustrating thing sometimes about art and artists, you know, and being in the creative space, especially once that becomes connected to any corporate interests. We're all kind of encouraged to be these specialists,
right?
You know, and to create these sort of micro niches. And this is the story we're telling, and this is the narrative. And it's like, oh, you know, there's so much more to who we all are than just that story. And I'll have, you know, I think it probably frustrates some people that, you know, I get the weirdest comments on some of my videos, because if I tell a story that is not about race, if I tell a story about, like, say, someone like Jim Cummings, who was a voiceover artist who does the voice of Winnie the Pooh. And that's just a story that I care about. It's like that hidden history thing. And, you know, I'm a voiceover artist, and it's just something that I have interest in. Or Marnie Nixon, you know, who was the person that did overdubbing for a bunch of Hollywood actresses. And I told her story. And then sometimes I'll have people come along and say, well, I thought you were telling stories about Black folks. It's like, yeah, I am. But I also care about old Hollywood. I also care about theater. I also care about the world of comedy. And I'm interested in media literacy and, you know, doing videos on critical thought. And there are a whole lot of things that encompass what I do. And, you know, music is just, it's a part of that garden, you know, that I'm growing. And I have to, as I said, you know, before, I had to come to a place of reckoning within myself that I was going to allow myself to be all of the things that I truly am in the world. And I can't shirk back from that. I sometimes do silly comedy videos that nobody watches, but I do them because I get enjoyment out of them. And my brothers and sisters laugh at them, especially if I'm doing
something about your
our mother. Right.
Yeah. I was about to say, I watch them and I love it. It's like your mom laughing at her own joke before she even tells it or whatever.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, it's like I definitely appreciate that. And that's what I think is so special about how you've sort of like taken control of the narrative when it comes to you've self-produced.
Yeah.
You've really effectively self-produced, and you look at a lot of like the really cultural significant people throughout the ages. Sometimes there's a publisher or a record label or someone that gives them their initial platform. But the really, really big world changers, maybe most people just remember that they did this or they did that, but they were really involved within a context. You know, it's like no one expects Oprah Winfrey to do one single thing.
Right.
We have no problem seeing her dressed as like some kind of like fairy goddess creature in that one movie, you know, and then like talking to Meghan Markle, you know, about whatever she's going through, you know. So, but I think it's really great that you've been able to, I believe through your social media, there does seem to be a balance and a concerted effort to portray the different sides of your work. I was excited when I found out that you were a singer. I think I found out that you were a singer because I had been following you, and then you were going to go perform somewhere, like maybe in Harlem or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I go to Spotify, and I actually found I saw a video of you performing. It looks like on like a TV show or something. Giants.
Oh, probably Tavis Smiley. Yeah, Giants. Yeah. The Tavis Smiley show.
And it was just such a beautiful video, and it was such a touching song. And it's like I went out I live in Santa Monica. I went out on my beach cruiser, smoked a joint, just listened to that song on repeat. So good, you know, just like really appreciating Everything about it's just, I just really appreciate your depth, your authenticity, your thoughtfulness. And it's just so deeply infused into everything that you create. There's so much richness there.
Thank you.
That I think you should be rich. I think that you should be a rich person.
I receive that, as we used to say in my churches growing up. I receive that.
Yeah, I receive that. So let's talk about that for a second. Your father was a minister, and maybe some people have told you that you have inherited that mantle.
Wow. Yeah. My grandmother was a pastor. And so I have an uncle that reminds me, he's like, what you're doing is not just about you. This is really an extension of something that has been given to you and has been passed down. And he puts it in that way. He's the only person that has ever really made that connection. And he's been there to remind me of that. So I appreciate you saying that, because I don't think about that often at all. Yeah. I don't think about what I do as being in any way connected to the world of preaching or, orating in that way.
Well, I'm here to tell you, the outside world sees it differently.
That's so fun. This is so interesting.
And I would so go to your church. Oh my God, I'm like waiting for your church. I'm like in the market for a new church. Like, yeah. And so something that we had said in one of our DM exchanges, you talked about deconstructing your faith. Would you be comfortable talking a little bit about that? You were raised.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What tradition were you raised in?
Well, my grandmother, as I said, was a pastor, just a little country church called the House of Prayer, and she was raised in the Church of God in Christ. And that's probably the biggest like Pentecostal Black denomination. If you see like musicians who are amazing, most of the huge gospel singers come out of that church. So it's a really, old traditional kind of environment for Black folks who are in the Pentecostal tradition. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother came out of that, but she came out of that church because they wouldn't let her pastor. So she became an independent kind of holiness minister. So it was a lot of, a lot of strict rules. Yeah. It was a lot of strict rules around, no pants and no makeup and all of the stuff that my parents grew up with. I didn't grow up with as strict an environment around that, but there was a lot of kind of emphasis on, covering up and keeping yourself unspotted from the world and remaining separate from the world and this kind of thing. So that was, on that part of it, our father made sure that we kept ties with her church, and he would go and play for her, and he would bring us all down there, and she ran a homeless ministry. Mm-hmm. So we would, help out and minister to those folks. And me and my brothers and sisters would sing together. Harmony, that was how I first started singing. So we would sing and minister down there and minister at the church. And that was how we grew up in that environment. And the other part of it was when he left her ministry when we were very young, and ended up jumping into the kind of non-denominational, more charismatic evangelical world, the kind of thing you see on television,
yes,
the Joels,
I know it,
and the TD Jakeses and those types of folks. Yeah. So yeah, there was a pastor. We grew up mostly in Tulsa, at least at first, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And there was a pastor there named Buddy Harrison, a white guy, who wanted to start a church in the late 70s. When that whole charismatic thing was really just exploding and becoming, the mega churches and stuff were just kind of, in their foundational stage. And he wanted to start a church, but he wanted it to be multicultural. So he called upon my father, which is why it's so odd to me now to see how much, I would say, white Christian nationalism has made it into the church, is so integrated into the church these days, because the church we grew up in, they made a very kind of intentional effort to integrate things from the very start. That's the reason he reached out to my dad. He's like, the music's got to be killing. We want a mixed crowd in here. We do not want this to be, as they say, the frozen chosen. We want, he wanted it to be kind of a high, fun environment. So they pulled on my dad and had him come in. So that was how he entered that world. So that's how I grew up. One foot in the holiness Pentecostal world with my grandmother, which was very much a fundamentalist environment. And then the other foot in that more kind of charismatic, like I call them the Christian hippies, at least at that time, that's really what they were. It was an extension of the hippie movement. but like, the Jesus people, those types. Yeah.
Well, that's a great initiation to go through, to have like a relationship in your early conditioning with uh, a, a a lineage of progress. Like even your grandmother leaving so that
Yes.
she could enter a more progressive environment, your father leaving and entering into a more progressive environment. There's like a multi-generational momentum
Mm-hmm.
of progress
Right.
right
Of moving
there.
away, breaking away, shedding. And I guess so. Yeah. You're helping me to connect some things today, Ben, that I never really thought of. Because then, what I've done in the deconstruction space has been that for me, just the next phase of that. Like, where's my path? Because what I grew up with is not working for me in my adulthood. And then I have to break away and kind of figure out what my own kind of spiritual path is.
And what does that look like now for you?
Well, I just did a conference called it's called Decon, and this happened a lot in the TikTok space. A lot of those folks are making content and having conversations around religious deconstruction, which is really just kind of a shedding and a throwing off of all of the presumptions, and a lot of it can be about false teachings and a lot of racist concepts that people grew up with in the church, right. A lot of the Christian nationalism that has, as I said, been integrated into so many church spaces, and people kind of confronting those questions of like, hey, this kind of patriotism mixed with faith, and those two things just being inextricably tied. Like that's not the vision of Jesus. That's not what Jesus was about at all. So It's a lot of young folks just asking a lot of questions about their faith and their Christianity, and some of them coming away from the idea of faith altogether. Some of us kind of landing in a more nebulous space. My deconstruction journey really started probably 20 years ago. I mean, at least 20 years ago. And I was always kind of the one who was kicking against the pricks. I was always the one who was asking, questions, and just things didn't really make total sense to me, I'll say, in the environment I grew up in. It was it was a lot of emphasis on spirituality. We were not, it was not the environment that I was in the churches that my father was involved in were not what you would call fundamentalist. So it wasn't so much that. It was more so like, hey, there's a lot of so-called spiritual stuff going on here. There's speaking in tongues, there's laying on of hands, and we're believing in for healing, and we're naming it and claiming it, and we're doing all of these things. But how much of this is really grounded in truth? How much of this is really grounded in, something that I could really stand behind? I would see people have hands laid on them and everybody's falling out. And it's like, in my mind, especially as I started to get into adolescence, it was like, okay, this feels like a lot of groupthink is going on here. It feels like a lot of pressure, for everyone to sort of toe the line. And if I wouldn't fall down when I was getting prayed for, then I was kind of, there was literally people would be scowling at me as I would go back to my seat. Like, you're just ruining our good time almost, or you're resisting what's going on here. And it's like, well, I didn't feel anything that would have made me fall down. So why am I being scorned? It's like, is this not okay that I'm not going along with this? So there was a lot of that type of questioning that went on for me as a young person. And then when I went to a super Christian conservative school, college that I did not want to go to, Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and, still receiving a lot of that sort of indoctrination and education around Christianity, but still starting to ask some questions. And there were some great professors there that really helped me to turn on that critical thinking muscle in my brain. And, in their now I can see I can see in retrospect what they were doing, but I didn't realize it at the time, that they were really trying to plant some seeds that said, hey, it's okay to be a Christian and question the 7-day creation story. It's okay to be a Christian and, not just believe everything that you're told wholesale, and that you're going against God and all of creation and humanity and, from the foundations of the earth, to say, hey, certain things don't make sense. So I really, once I left college and I moved to Detroit, Michigan, then I was able to sort of just, all right, I'm going to study world religions and I'm going to study where my faith, tradition came from, and just flesh this out and understand more deeply. And I was so, it was scary. It was a scary journey. It really was. I remember, speaking of Marianne Williamson, she had a church in Warren, Michigan, because I had moved away from Tulsa and I had moved to Detroit with a friend of mine after school. And that was just to break away from family. I just needed to get out. And when I was living up there, I would watch Marianne Williamson frequently on television. And she was the kind of speaker that we were told, you don't really veer to that because that's not within the Christian tradition. And, but I remember seeing her on Oprah and I just loved to hear her speak. And I was like, oh my God, she has a church. I had no idea she was a pastor. And so I would listen to her. I could never get up the courage to actually go to her church because it felt like a betrayal of sorts at that time. But she was one of the people that I kind of, clung to at that time. It was really cool to kind of have someone who was there to teach spiritual principles without that heavy dogma that I grew up with. And I was just, I was craving that release, that freedom from a lot of that heavy dogmatic message. So it's been, like I said, it's been quite a journey for the last 20 years. But, I feel like now I'm in the headspace where I can kind of speak from a place of experience to other people who are going through that same journey, which is what the Deconstruction Conference was all about.
And did you share your deconstruction experience at the conference? Is that what you're...
I did not actually share my experience. A lot of speakers did. It was an online virtual conference. I ended up speaking about my topic was called Letting Go of Hell.
Wow.
And it was, yeah, it was very ambitious. It was all about kind of, because that was, especially within that holiness Pentecostal tradition that I came out of with my grandmother's church. It was just, that was hammered into you constantly. And then in the more charismatic, non-denominational environment, it was more about, the rapture and the second coming and end times and all of that stuff. Just, it kind of collided to just make this really fearsome brew within all of us as children, almost any child that you could talk to who comes out of these fundamentalist environments have stories about trauma that they have endured around the concept of hell. And still, even people who are deconstructing, oftentimes just they run up against that wall of like, I cannot progress. I can't ask these questions. I can't move forward in my spiritual journey because, oh my God, what about hell? What if I'm wrong? And so that was my focus. I talked about how I've sort of released that within myself. And it wasn't some deep eschatological exegesis or anything like that. It was not, because that's not how I found freedom. That's not how I came into it. So I really just spoke from the heart, and talked about, these fear-based tactics that are used to kind of keep people in line in religious circles, and how much we seem to need hell as, a relegating or a controlling, force to be able to, pull people into this idea of worship and of keeping with religious traditions. It's like, well, have you noticed how much this is needed? I grew up in Tulsa with a guy pastor named Carlton Pearson. I don't know if you know him at all, but he came out of that, super holiness tradition. And he was a pastor there, and he started to question the concept of hell and lost everything. Everything was taken away from him. So I got to see that up close, firsthand. And I went to his church at that time. So that spoke greatly to me. It was like, wow, he lost everything over the concept of hell, not over any other little doctrinal differences that he might have had, but hell. It was that important. So yeah, that was what I talked about at the Decon conference.
That's incredible. That actually resonates so much. I was raised Mormon.
Oh, wow.
And so, and for better or for worse, not even like regular Mormon, like my family, started the Mormon church.
Really?
So we're descendants of the founding families. And
Wow.
so very, very pervasive, every area of life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I remember is sort of like not really fitting in anywhere, going to public schools, not really fitting in anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
because we were Mormon. And one of the big complaints, I remember being like, what's wrong with being Mormon? One of the big complaints, first of all, I've got plenty of beef now that we could talk about, you know, with the
Mm-hmm.
church. But at the time, what people always said was, you guys think Hitler is in heaven. And I remember being like, that doesn't sound right. And I was like, I don't think we believe that. No, I don't think so. And I asked my parents about it. And it was basically this, it was because of the fact that the Mormon church doesn't believe in hell.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, they actually, the doctrine is that this world is the hardest, scariest, gnarliest thing that you'll ever experience.
Wow.
And there are like sort of stages, degrees of heaven.
Right, right.
But even the lowest degree of heaven is like absolute paradise compared to this world.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that concept of no hell was, you know, looking back, it's like I've got like a whole list of complaints about the Mormon church and how they've approached different things since their founding, you know, and there's like a lot of serious problems there. The role of women in the entire organization, whether they can or can't perform all different kinds of rites, the fact that non-white people were not even allowed to enter into the temples until like the 70s, let alone you know, Black men or men who are not white also entering into the priesthood, women never being allowed to enter into any kind of like certain, you know, there's all kinds of really serious toxic theology that is taught, that is at play, that is in the history, that is there. And but that's not what people hated Mormons for. What they hated Mormons for was that there was no hell.
Right. We gotta have hell. We need hell because that's the whole selling point. Yeah. It was like, and even, you know, when my parents passed away, it's hard to believe it will be 9 years this year, but it has been, they both passed away in the same year. And I remember a couple of people asking me who knew, you know, that I was kind of had separated from a lot of the hardline theology of the Christian church, and that I didn't really believe in the concepts of, you know, a concrete concept of hell. It's like, do you believe your parents are, you know, where do you think your parents are? It's like, I don't know where they are necessarily. I wish that I, you know, at a time like this, that I could have that beautiful, you know, reassurance as the Bible speaks about that, you know, of where they are, and just knowing, oh, we're going to see them one day. And it's just, you know, but it wasn't enough to cause me to cling to that in a way that I didn't truly believe. It's like, yeah, if you're going to say that hell is a fallacy, or is really not biblically sound, then how can you lock into the concept of heaven? I mean, you can't necessarily have it both ways. And so it's a hard journey, and you run up against that at the most difficult times in your life. Like I said, loss of a parent, it's like, okay, well, that's where the rubber meets the road. You know, what really is in your heart. And people will ask you questions, you know, like you said, about Hitler and is he in hell? And it's like, you know, I'm sorry. No, I'm not going to buy into a concept that I do not truly spiritually connect with, because I need Hitler to be punished so badly, or because I need to, you know that I'm going to see my parents. I mean, it doesn't get any more serious than that. Is Hitler going to be punished? Are you ever going to see your parents again? And it's like, no, you know, these, and then it becomes so glaringly obvious why we have to create these constructs, because Hitler needs to be punished. Right. And because I need to see my parents again.
Right.
So that in and of itself actually ultimately helps to reinforce what it is that I feel like I've been, drawn to for so long. It's like, well, no, I'm not going to create the story or buy into a story that has been constructed to give me comfort about evil being punished or good being rewarded in some ultimate sense. No, not in the way that it's been taught to me. And it's kind of a heartbreaking place to come to, because you can talk about it in theory. Hitler, that's always the name you hear thrown out there. Is Hitler going to be fun? We can pontificate and have these sort of, thinky conversations around, the theory of it all. But when it comes to your loved ones or you contemplating your own mortality, that's it's just the most difficult space to allow yourself to really truly confront what you believe, what you truly believe. And I feel like I've had that conversation with myself at this point. And if life ends and we don't know, which is what the thing I like to remind myself of and remind anyone of, you don't know what comes after this until you have experienced it. So those of us who are on this side of, the earthly plane, we haven't experienced that yet. We have not crossed over. We don't know what happens. So to claim any certainty in that way, I think is wishful thinking, and it can be disingenuous. We really don't know. And I think we have to learn to live with the uncertainty of that, and stop looking for that, stop looking for certainty where it does not need to exist. It really does, because it leads us down. It leads us to some fallacies, I think, and some magical thinking and wishful thinking that just really doesn't serve us or anyone. And I think it's been harmful. I think hell, at least in my world, has been a very, very harmful theology that even for people who claim to be biblical literalists, it's not even a theologically sound doctrine.
Right.
It's not theologically sound. So yeah, that's the big kind of 5-star issue in my world as well. It's hell.
Hell.
Even if they say it isn't, they're like, oh, this is not about the fear of hell. This is not what do they say, a fire insurance policy, and it's all about relationship. And it's like, is it? Let's start really asking those questions. If we took that away, what does your faith look like?
I saw a meme recently that said it was Jesus on the other side of the door with no handle. That whole idea, he has to knock, but we have to open the door. Jesus is out, this famous painting, he's outside the door. There's no handle on the door. He's there like he's knocking. And the meme says, "It's me, Jesus. Let me into your heart. Accept me as your Lord and Savior, and I will protect you." And then the person on the other side of the door says, "Protect me from what?" And he says, "From what I'm going to do to you if you don't."
Pretty much. Right. And I would see people, pastors that they would twist themselves into like pretzel like contortions trying to explain how it wasn't really that. No, it's not really. He's not really doing it. He's not real. No, there's no choice but to,
it's like,
for you to go to hell. It's like, well, but he's God. He doesn't, he could make this all right if he wanted to.
Right.
Yeah. All of that stuff. It really never gelled with me, but it was, this is just a certain, there's a certain trauma that comes with all of that.
Right.
For those of us, for whom that was not, it wasn't just like I said, a theoretical conversation. It was reality. My oldest sister would come into our room every night and say, "Don't forget to ask God to forgive you of all of your sins." And now I look back on that and it's like, we were 10, 11-year-old kids and literally thinking we would end up, if Hitler, before he killed himself, had repented, then he could be absolved of everything that he did and go to heaven. But we as 10, 11-year-old kids who maybe stole a pack of bubble gum or something would end up in the same place as Hitler because there was supposedly no hierarchy of sins.
Right.
And it's just breaks my heart now to look back at those children that we were, and to know that we truly internalized that. It makes me really sad.
Yeah, that is very sad. You know, it's like the work of uh, unpacking toxic theology is like so crucial. Sometimes people will give me a hard time too. There's a few YouTube videos of how I'm not a real Christian, but I'm a New Ager, which apparently is like the worst thing you can be.
It is the worst thing you can be. I'm just,
Yeah.
letting you know it is.
Yeah, it apparently literally is. Yeah. So that Ben Decker dude is bad news. But you know, I was, you know, sort of like someone brought it to my attention that like this video had been made about how I'm not a real Christian, and it's because I had written a book called Meditations on Christ, where I was responding to a lot of confusion from the Christian community about meditation, and I wanted to make meditation feel very safe. And so I incorporated meditation exercises into like prayers and Bible verses, and that was on my second book. And they did not give a shit at how beautifully it was written. That dude is a New Ager, get him out of here. And and it was just like amazing. It was like, you know, just really watching how much easier it is and was for people to cling to the way things had already been interpreted. And and so that's kind of like the thing that I see with your work, where it's like the reason that feels like what the new world of like religion or church should feel like is like, what's the purpose of religion? Well, at its best, it's like to help us live better lives, to help us be better people. Even if we say the whoever first invented hell, even if we say that person had good intentions, you know, there's a way to sort of like revisit some of these old beliefs and have like a new interpretation of them. Something Marianne Williamson teaches. Hi, Marianne, I'll send you this episode. Giving you lots of shout outs. So, you know, something that Marianne teaches is that we're not, and it's from A Course in Miracles, we're not punished for our sins by God, but we're punished by our sins. So the way Course in Miracles presents it is a little bit more closely related to like the Eastern concept of karma, where it's not really even about what happens when you die. It's about what happens when you lie, what happens when you take advantage of somebody, what happens when you hurt somebody, what happens internally, you know, and karmically in your experience. Another thing that's interesting about A Course in Miracles that connects directly to some of the things you were talking about is in the Course in Miracles manual for teachers, it's like set up like questions and answers. One of the questions on there is reincarnation so? And the way they describe the answer to that is so interesting, because in a comparative religious conversation, in an interfaith dialogue, we can't talk about heaven and hell without talking about reincarnation. You know, because they're like, those are like the two big teams, you know,
right?
And when you look at A Course in Miracles, the way they handle that, they say, well, it doesn't matter if reincarnation is so. What matters is that we all agree that birth is not the beginning of our journey. Something happened before birth, whether you believe you were in a previous incarnation or you believe that you were in the pre-existence in heaven. And death is not the end, whether you believe that you're going to reincarnate into another body somewhere, or you're going to go into another realm, like a heaven realm or a hell realm. You know, what matters the most is your life right now. And if you want to talk about what happened before you were born, all that you really need to know, all that really matters, is that birth in this lifetime was not the beginning of your story. all that you need to know is death at the end of this lifetime is not the end of your story.
Mm.
And I found a lot of it, like intellectually, like relaxed this unconscious need to know.
To know, exactly. Yeah, there's a in our world there's that in the world I grew up in, that uncertainty is just not allowed. It's just you are not allowed to be uncertain. You know, you have to claim certainty about these things, because otherwise, you know, you're susceptible to whatever, you know, it's like falling off of a cliff. I mean, just there's nothing worse. So I am the manifestation of probably every fear that my grandmother ever had. I'm sure. But maybe she's in a realm now where she, you know, she can understand more deeply and would connect more deeply with who I am and where I've landed.
Yeah. She does. There's that part of her that left the church because they wouldn't let her pastor, because she had that call to pastor, and that part of her you have.
Wow.
And she sees that.
Wow. That's so cool. That's just such a cool connection to make. And I would never make it. And I feel like in some fundamental way, I would never make that connection between her call and my call, which seems, you know, almost absurd to say, but I would never really make that connection, because she had 16 children. And so I have dozens of cousins and, you know, tons of aunts and uncles, and just a huge family. And it's like, you know, you have certain cliques and groups that end up, you know, hewing very, very close to what we were taught. And there, you know, a lot of preachers, a lot of ministers in my family. And then there are those of us who are, you know, somewhere in the middle, where we're kind of, you know, haven't exactly turned away from it, but we're not as deeply invested. And then there are those who just, you know, seem to have not been impacted at all by the gospel message at all. They're out there just kind of living, you know, some of them in jail and just doing whatever it is that they're doing. But, you know, those who hewed very close to that message and, you know, literally sat at her feet and, you know, absorbed that from her, and just, you know, they will proudly claim the mantle, and they want it. It always has felt like a barrier to me. Like, oh, she's out there. She's, you know, my grandmother, her name is Mother Grace Tucker, and she was kind of a mother to the city there in Tulsa. Like I said, worked with the homeless and the very poor there in the city. But it just is something I felt a little bit disconnected from, because, you know, it's like, oh, well, I'm not one of them. I'm not one of the ones, you know, who's very close to that.
But message. Really, you're the only one.
I don't know about that.
You got the real thing. That real good. That's what I see. You know, I see like that was the big thing that she did. She clearly did a lot, you know. But that was like the big change that she had to, you know,
that breaking away.
Yeah. She had to do that in her own heart, in that like insane way. And in our own lives, it's never the things that we do perfectly that are like the things that make us exceptional. It's the gnarly shit that we had to go through, that we didn't know how we would make it through the others. That's what makes the big difference. And I see that, you know, that power and that resilience and that like that trust of the inner knowing. That's that inheritance from that bloodline. You know, that's like cool. That's like the ancestral power that I see. That's like right there.
That's like, so cool, Ben. I really appreciate that insight. That's really cool. That's really cool, because I actually made a film. I started a film on her that's online, where I was telling her story, and it was really cool because it just was a few years before she died. So I got her on film, like talking about her life and her world. And it's like, it was my attempt to kind of connect with her in this human way, because all of this churchy stuff always seemed to kind of cloud that relationship, because I knew that I wasn't that, super spiritual, like, person of faith that she was, or that a lot of our, my family is. And so I wanted to make my own connection with her, and I just wanted to tell her story. So I need to finish the film, but I've got a couple of parts of it that are up online. Cool. Just with me attempting to connect, attempting to find that connection with her.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to hear that from your perspective, that, I do carry a part of her energy.
Yeah. The revolutionary part. That's huge.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm going to let that inform what I do going forward.
You rock with it too. It's so intuitive to you. You rock with it. Like, as soon as you started describing her, I saw it. I was like, there she is. Damn, here it is.
Cool. That's so cool. And it was cool to have, that example in front of us, because, as I said, Church God in Christ, they still do not allow women to pastor. They still do not allow them to have positions of leadership, other than, wow. I think they can be, I don't remember what the top title that they can carry is, missionary or something like that. But to see that example, to see the example on the, as I said, the charismatic kind of non-denominational side of things that my father ended up going into, to see the example of that interracial kind of communion on that side, which was unusual, and to see the example with her in that fundamentalist environment of a woman who was leading and making decisions. I mean, she was just she was a revolutionary. She really was. And to grow up with that example, it's like, well, I'm not going to let anyone tell me that, of what I'm capable of. She was doing this in friggin' 1949, a Black woman. First woman to establish an independent church in Oklahoma was her.
Wow.
So, there's certain barriers that I never had to break through because I saw her do it. It was just kind of, intuitive.
That's some good shit. That's some good shit. You're from good stock.
I truly believe that. I'm really grateful. I have to remember to be grateful. I have to remember to reach out for those things. As much as I challenge and, as I said, kick against the pricks, I have to remember, like, grab the good stuff too. Yeah. Remember that precious thing that was handed down as well.
I think for me in my deconstruction process, being raised Mormon, also being gay and Mormon, oh my God, it was a shit show, man. It was
bless your heart.
Oh, bless my mom's heart. Like, holy, but the journey changed when I forgave Jesus. I was like, you know what? He didn't do this.
Wow.
He's not the one that did this to these,
wow.
And from that point, it was actually, some of the listeners will know this, but you might think it's kind of funny to hear it. It was actually during a psychedelic experience. I was in the jungle, partaking in a shamanic psychedelic vision quest journey. And that was when I had before that day, if you would have asked me about Jesus, I would have been like, not my guy.
Right.
But he came to me, and I just felt something change. And there was like all these messages and stuff that came through and everything. And it was all about, instead of hating my lineage, hating all the mistakes of the people who came before me, hating the imperfections of all of them, and therefore hating things about myself, it showed me the light inside of all of it. And it was like, some of this was majorly fucked up, and some of this was real from the beginning.
Wow.
And so since then, I've really learned to love the tradition I was raised in, while simultaneously holding them accountable for the things that's why I can't be there. You know, I can't be there until certain things are like completely addressed and changed. And so one of the I was raised to believe that when you make a big mistake, you will be excommunicated from the church. And they always said, even if you become excommunicated, that's just part of the repentance process. You can still come back. You can still be baptized again. Even if you make a mistake so big that you leave. That's how big God's love is. That's how big the love of Christ is, that you will always be able to come back if you want to do the actual inner repentance work, you know? And I kind of feel that way about the church, not just the Mormon church, but like the institutionalized church. It's like, hey, if you can come back, you're excommunicated. Sorry, churches, I'm excommunicating you because you have stuff to figure out.
You've got some work to do.
Yeah. And I'm open. Like I want to hear good news. Like I'm not in an angry place. I want to hear good. I want to hear when a church did something good. I want to fucking hear that. And I don't hear enough of it. You know, I want more of that. So there was a huge healing for me in the deconstruction process, where I think at the beginning I was like, damn, this is making kids want to kill themselves, because that's what I was experiencing. I was experiencing suicidal ideation.
Oh my God.
I was like, these churches are making kids want to kill themselves. They're making queer kids feel like they're better off dead, literally. And they're making all kinds of other stuff, like really getting deep into people's unconscious minds. Like the 1970s is when you started letting Black people in the temple. The 1970s, that shit just happened, bro.
Right.
That's like just now.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't hear them like really own it in this bigger way. You don't see like, you know, front-facing Black leadership, and you don't hear about like the real proactive, you know. That's what I loved about Marianne Williamson's bid for presidency is reparations. You know, I feel like my church, I feel like my church, my lineage, I'm like, bro, can you guys have so much money, you guys have so much power, reparations, bro, just for your own shit. Not even for slavery, just for your shit.
Right.
For you not letting Black people come into the temples, not letting Black men become priests. Like, just reparations for your own shit, just in the last 200 years. You know, but they're not embracing it. And so I can't give them my tithing. I can't give them my time. I can't preach their gospel, you know, even though there's a part of me that wants that, right? There's like that part of me that's like in a fantasy world where it's like, one day, my family's tradition that my very sincere ancestors created, and my very deeply sincere ancestors who went through their own horrible violence and, you know, massacres and lots of kidnappings and murders and arson and all kinds of horrible stuff that we have, you know, that just in the last 200 years, you know, so sad. I get it, very sincere, But now that we're not in that place anymore, now that the Mormon Church has 20 million members all over the world and $100 billion in cash stockpiling in a bank account, now we're okay. Yeah. As a collective. Yeah. Now's a really fucking good time to show us what you're made of. Like, let us know who you really, really are. And I would love to see that. I'm talking about Mormons because that's my own church, but I'd love to see that in all of the major religious institutions, you know, and until then they're excommunicated, you know, until then I'm going to your church, you know.
I agree. It's a really sad thing to me to see the push that's happening. It's something I really have tried not to engage with because it really it angers me at this point, and it's just not a healthy headspace for me to be in when I see the push that is happening, this sort of just active resistance to I mean, so much now, this backlash that has always existed, but just the modern iteration of like, you know, we're banning these books and we're not going to talk about race and we're not going to, you know, address these things as though they have any current impact on our society. And we're going to decenter these things and actively work against trans kids or the understanding of, you know, LGBTQ issues or anything like that. It just fills me with such an, I'd like to say a holy anger, but I don't know if it's really even that holy, but just such an anger that I've really disengaged with it. And a couple of people have been like, you know, I because of what I do, people will send me articles on this stuff and be like, oh, we're going to talk about this. It's like, no, I'm not going to talk about this. Not right now. Yeah. Not to say that I won't in the future. But you know, these initiatives that are happening, which I'm sure will become even more widespread as we're going forward. It's such a denial, and it's just such a, I don't even really have words for it, which is why I haven't really been able to engage with it. But just that resistance to that reckoning that you're speaking about, there's such a resistance still in 2023 to even really acknowledging a lot of the damage that has been done historically by the church, by the United States of America, period, which has really been inextricably tied to the church.
Right.
But there's just, I don't even understand where that energy comes from. So that's why it's hard for me to engage with.
Right.
It's like, what is this? You know, what's this resistance?
What I think is so interesting about your work and your music and the way all these things tie in is like the only way, you know, a nation is a collection of like individuals, lots of individuals. Every community is internally diverse, you know, every single community. We say things like Christians, Jews, Muslims, like all Christians are like this and all Jews are like this and all Muslims, but really each community is internally diverse.
Right.
We all took the same Sunday school. We all got something else out of it. We all didn't like this we all had different feelings in all the different ways about what we just went through. Mm-hmm. So each community is internally hyper diverse, each individual so diverse, you know, and we don't know that. First of all, we collectively don't know that. We don't realize, we think it's like this big problem that I'm different. And so we hide the fact that I'm different, but actually everybody's different. Mm-hmm. And so we're too busy pretending to be like each other and hiding the fact that we're all secretly different so that we fit in where we are for security. And so we're never, if we can't begin to recognize that, we're never going to be able to recognize that every single other person in these other communities are diverse, hyper individual. And we have to also learn to say, I actually didn't know this thing and I made this mistake and I'm embarrassed that I made this mistake and I don't want to be the person that makes that kind of mistake. Fuck, how do I make this right? We don't do that enough in our lives, let alone on a nationwide scale. Mm-hmm. People would rather just lie until the end of their lives just to protect whatever they have going on than own it. What the fuck makes us, if we can't do that on an individual level, what makes us think that we're going to be able to do it on a larger scale? Which is why I think that parallel, that's those sort of two sides that we started talking about, the outer work that's more about commentary, community, social issues, you know, the outer world, and then that inner work, they're so crucial to have both of them going on, because I can only see the benefit and the value of these certain kinds of issues because I've had to do some level of inner work.
Yes.
To be able to go be on Marianne Williamson's campaign for president and sit there and flesh out what does it mean that we have a reparations plan? Well, what would that plan look like? You know, and actually fleshing out those documents and those ideas and creating social media content and everything, introducing this idea, answering, you know, questions, preconceived notions, combating disinformation about this idea, the case for this idea, all that elaborate work that we as the campaign did for the issue of reparations had to come because Marianne Williamson, in her own heart,
right,
30 years ago, God knows, saw it, had a realization, had to go through a deep inner realization. Me, everyone else on the campaign, the larger community that did all the research, that has all the information about all of this, the people that have gone through these things, the systematic oppression that's happened over the years, like people actually surviving it, living through it, communicating about it, sharing their stories and experiences. All of that is like in this big cauldron that requires that can only become activated as an individual is willing to take some level of responsibility for something, which as Americans, it's like the most entitled population, it's the most, and it's the most selfish population. They don't want to do a single thing that's not specifically for their own needs. Why? Because they're scared shitless. How are we gonna ever learn anything if we can't get out of our own like absolute terror of our own survival? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a very strange kind of, it's a learned thing, and it's passed down from generation to generation. Because I don't know if every society necessarily is run in that way, where it's just I don't know, I'm sure it's not unique to the United States, but it feels that way sometimes.
Right.
Just that presumption of domination. It probably has a lot to do with how the country was founded to begin with.
100%.
A lot of those principles that it was founded on, and a lot of what folks have just been able to get away with for eons. And there's just the presumption that it should all just continue.
Well, that's what I love about Giants is that song, your song, Giants, has this very deeply personal energy to it, and it's like for those of us who can see that something's really seriously wrong, it's like that need, that collective need can become a personal call. You talk about, in that song, you talk about basically, I will walk this road alone, and it's the personal journey. Like I have to really see what these things mean for me and really find the truth from inside me, because the giants in our lives are our personal problems. They're also the inherited intergenerational problems, like what we're talking about. Yeah. And we have to find our relationship to them. Like where am I in this matrix of contextual privilege and disenfranchisement? Where do I land in that? What's my sphere of influence within that? What can I do? What should I do? What should/must, what's the right thing to be done from that place? And so that's what I think is so special about your work, is you're doing a very good job clearly connecting to the social issues, clearly communicating them, presenting them in like a cool, interesting, watchable, helpful way. Where you're very fair to the audience. You're not, you don't project onto the audience, you're not yelling at the audience, you're very fair to whoever's listening. And then also in your music, it's got that deeply contemplative side. So I feel like that's the church of Dara Starr Tucker. And it's like, it's got its music, it's got its great music. And it's got its Sunday school, and the emphasis is on the things that you find important, and you're very prophetic, you're very intuitive, what you find important is what's really important, And I can't wait for your new album to come out in June.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to this album dropping, as they say. I'm looking forward to it because I feel like, I get to kind of return back. I did half covers and half originals. So, but I get to return back to, putting my own message out there, which I feel like is so much more authentic to who I am and what I'm really about. And it's eclectic. The messages are, they're all over the place, just like I am. There's no particular theme. But I hope that people can find something of relevance to their own lives in those messages, because it just, I don't know, music would be a very satisfying thing to do if I could release albums or songs as frequently as I could release videos. Right. And with as much autonomy as I could release videos. Because it's like, oh, okay, you got this message, you have this thing you want to say, and you put it out there, and then people hear it, and it's, the feedback is right there, and people are following, and they're sharing, and they're liking, and they're whatever. But for the music, it feels like it is a much slower, much more kind of arduous process to try and get those messages into people's ears.
Right.
But figuring out how to bring that music now to the people who have latched on to what I do. It's the next big challenge for me. It's like, all right, well, how do we convert these people to music listeners? How do we get them to hear Giants? How do we get them to hear some of the music that we're getting ready to release? So it's a unique challenge. My label is having, an interesting time trying to figure out what sort of strategies to use, to help people understand that, first of all, that I do this. And then secondly, like, hey, let's put some of this in your ears and see how it hits you. Are these the same people who would lock into the music that I do? I think a lot of them are. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of them are like you, who are just like, it's just right. It flows. One flows right into the other. That's what I believe. Mm-hmm. I believe a lot of these people are music listeners. And so I'm looking forward to kind of rolling out a lot of this new material.
Well, I know it's going to be successful. I know that your audience is building and very, very engaged. I'm here to support in any way that I can. You can always reach out and ask. I'm super excited about this episode. I'd love to have you on again. And I would so go to like a listening party or anything that you did if you were to do like a virtual event where you bridge those two parts of yourself, where you talk a little bit about the issues, and even
that's
if it's
the goal.
Yeah, I would so go to that. And I think that people would love that, something. Dear old Marianne, hi again, Marianne. Something that she says is, she was like, we used to go to, smoke weed and go to anti-war rallies.
Yeah,
we did it at the same time. She was like, we were, people always talked about how hippies were just like getting stoned. She was like, yeah, we were getting stoned, but we were also stopping the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And going to concerts and listening to performances and everything. And it's like, I crave that. Yeah. And I know that there are other people who just totally would love and appreciate what you have to say, and all of the magic that you encode within the music. Because like I said, I love your range. I think it's refreshing. So many of us have a great range. Our hearts, our spirits, our souls have a range.
Yes.
And you have you've touched mine in that way.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. Yeah. And that's a goal of mine, actually, to have some combined performances where I do a bit of speaking, and then like, all right, let's go over here and let's, play a couple of songs and just let you meditate on that. And then we'll come back and, have that speaking element. So I'm not totally sure how that would work, but that's exactly the type of thing that I would love to start doing more of. So
I want to do that with you. I want to host you in Los Angeles.
Yay!
I would love that if I could just like be up there hosting, interviewing you.
Great. Interview. Yeah. Perfect.
I would love
that. Perfect. Interview with musical performance. That's my jam right there. That's my peak state, I think.
Well, consider it on the record and consider it like in the works. I would be so happy to do that. I feel like when I was introduced to your work, I know we're like out of time. I feel like when I was introduced to your work and what you were approaching, you refreshed something inside me. It was
Wow.
so refreshing. It was like
Wow.
real and authentic, and it was powerful without being unpalatable, even though that's
Mm.
like maybe like it's a really stupid word to say. It
Mhm.
was just like I loved that you could sing beautiful songs, and that you were willing to be silly and have these like funny skits about like, your mom trying to tell a joke about puppies or whatever, I just loved it. I love it. And I feel like you're a great candidate to be a billionaire. I feel like I would trust you
Hey,
with
keep
huge
talking.
resources. I feel like the universe would trust you.
Thank
You're
you.
like a safe person to have a huge audience. You're like a safe person to have tons of resources because of the depth of your wisdom and the
Mm.
expansiveness of the ways that you're willing to create and express yourself. And that's a huge blessing.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate you saying that. And I feel that way too.
Good.
I am a safe person to be. I'm like, man, if I had the resources, this is how I would utilize it. This is my vision. This is my dream. Like I feel like I'm ready for that. Only the universe, as you say, really knows that when we are truly ready. But
Right.
I have felt like I'm ready to take on that, that just to move into that next space,
Yeah.
and I do appreciate you saying earlier, and I didn't even get a chance to acknowledge it, but you said, you felt that my voice was meant for something even outside of the social media space. It was meant to have global impact. And I really appreciate that too, because I feel like sometimes, when whatever platform or arena that you become quote unquote successful in,
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes you can be imprinted with that and you can kind of take that on as an identity. And
Right.
I'm having to challenge that in myself now. It's like, is what I'm doing just meant to exist here? Is it meant to have scope? Is it meant to live beyond this? Should I even be, wishing for that? Is that old school? But I do appreciate your kind of vote of confidence in that area, because those are questions that I've been asking myself lately.
Well, I have to say, I've met a lot of people. I've met a lot of Oscar winners and Emmy winners, and my career earlier in my career, I guess like 15 years ago, I worked with celebrities, and
Mm.
I did gifting suites. I produced red carpet events and stuff like
Wow.
that. And you are way smarter and way more interesting than most of them. Okay. There are plenty of talent out there, plenty of great, good people out there, not intending to insult anybody in particular, but I look at some of these people who've won some of these awards that you would just like kill to have one nomination for, not even winning, it's like stuff like that. And they're nothing wrong with them, but you're on that level.
I appreciate that, Ben, so much. I really do. Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch you continue to live a long, healthy life, to do a great job at all the different things that you're doing. I'm excited to support amplifying your voice, sending resources your way. Everyone, Dara Starr Tucker, album coming out. We're creating some kind of event in LA. I feel like a lot of energy around a momentum that's building for you. I feel a lot of I feel the energy is like there's a spiritual safety around you moving forward. I feel like the fears that may come up around you expanding your audience are going to be eliminated because the spirit world has your back, and you're going to see it. It like reminds me of in the first Avatar movie, when they're like, oh shit, all these humans are here with their big machines. There's that moment where like they're like, oh, we're it's over. And then you see these alien animal dinosaurs come out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we didn't even take them into account. We didn't even, we weren't counting them. We didn't think they were going to be there to support. So I think any anything that could come up that would be a fear, there's like supernatural support
Wow.
behind what you're doing, because I feel it so strong. I'm like, this is like God's anointed right here.
Wow.
Here
Thank
it
you so
is.
much, Ben.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're speaking my language. So thank you, Ben. I really appreciate those words.
Yeah. Well, the honor is all mine. Thank you for doing this. And I would love to do this again.
Yeah, I would love it anytime. Really. Anytime. I'm looking forward to us talking about that. Hopefully that performance that will happen soon and
That,
getting to meet you in person.
yeah, I would love that. Take care.
Okay, you too.